so we come into the else statement. Okay, so the else statement is, for example, if you want, for example, let's say you've got a bunch of ice creams and they're all different flavors, and you have, you know how men sometimes, or most men that I know, just like vanilla ice cream, they don't want anything else. But if it's a woman, most of the time they will say anything but vanilla, it doesn't matter. So you might have a bunch of ice creams like vanilla, toffee, chocolate, strawberry, for example. And then you will use this if statement that says, if, again, this is true, then you execute this. And for everything else, execute this. So, for example, if Edward, who's a guy, comes along, give him vanilla ice cream. Else, if it's not Edward, right? So let's say you know that there's only going to be girls, but Edward is coming. So if it's anyone else, which in this case means a girl or a woman, then give them any other ice cream. Okay, so just not to confuse you, this else statement doesn't have a condition of its own because it's executed when the if statement is not executed, but it's also executed when the if statement has been satisfied and everything else that's left gets whatever is underneath here. Okay, so I'll just give you an example. So here's accession number, so it's going to go if the accession number, or if for the accession in accession number, here's your for loop, here's your condition. If the accession in accessions starts with A, print it. Otherwise, if it doesn't start with A, print I do not start with A. Now, all of this is going to be executed. This has to be true, so this has to be, only if it's A, will it print the accession. If it's not A, so this will also be executed, then it will print I do not start with A. So just, this is not only going to get executed if the if statement is false. It gets executed regardless of this. Okay, so this, even if this is true, this will still get executed. So if you have a look, you will see that it's doing it for each of that. It prints only the accession if it starts with A, but if it doesn't start with A, then it prints I do not start with A. Okay. But again, yeah, usually we would separate. This is something that we would separate. This is an example of something that you would do when, for example, you want to execute, you want to read in a file and then check for something in the file and print whatever you find. For example, print all snips into the file name called snip. So you'll open a file the way that we showed in open and writing to files. And if it's not a snip, so for example, if it's an indel, an insertion or deletion or copy number variation, any number of those other mutations, then you're going to print it to some other file, for example. So here we took the same examples, and we, instead of just saying print it to the screen, I just changed 2 lines here. So it's just this line and this line to write it, and obviously I open files for writing. The one is accessions of interest and the other one is leftover accessions. So if I run the script now, it's going to print all accessions that start with A to the file called accessions of interest, because I told it to write it to there. And note, I have to put a new line in there, because when you print it automatically puts a new line, but not when you write. So then all these, this A and A will all be written attached to each other. You don't want that, you want it all on a separate line. Else, print whatever is left over to the file called leftover accessions. Okay, so this will basically create those two files. So you will see over here that it printed the accessions of interest, or because that I said everything in A should be printed to there, and L leftover accessions, you will see that it printed everything that didn't start with the A to the leftover accessions file. And I said here that you have to note that even though there are multiple indentation levels as before, but the if and the else statements are on the same level, right? You will see, because, and it won't work if you put it outside of this loop. But you can have multiple ifs in here. So that's a little bit of a more complicated example. So, but just remember they are directly underneath each other. But you also get an elif. So let's say that you need more than one. This is a highly organized event, and you want to make sure that the boys get the vanilla, the girls get the strawberry, and you might even say the girls get the strawberry or the chocolate, and everything else goes to the babies, or hopefully not to animals. But yeah, you might have multiple conditions that have to be met, so then you would use the Elif statement. So again, it's directly underneath each other, so it will run this. If it's true, it will print this. It will print everything under here for which this is true, and then if it's not true, or if it's done with that, it will go to Elif, and it will, if this condition is true, it will run these statements, and you can have multiple Elifs in there. Sometimes one line, like I said, of Elif can be Elif, and you can have an or and in here, but that's the same for every one of these statements. They can be complexed in which comparison operators you use, right? So we see, so like more than or equal to, and, for example, so you would say if it's a human and it's a guy or a boy or a man, give him the vanilla, right? So you can have multiple things in there. And then again, obviously your else statement has the else. I'm saying optional here, not optional in the sense that it's optional whether you put a condition here, because this is usually empty, so there's no expression. But it's optional in the sense that you don't need to use the else. You could do perfectly, you could just have ifs and elifs, okay? But elif and else cannot exist without the if. So this can be completely on its own, as we saw right at the start, or this if can be combined with just the if and an else, or if can only be combined with an elif, or they can all three be in one script. But you don't have to have this if you have elif statements. Okay. Yeah, and you can read that on its own. It's basically going to do the same thing in terms of which it skips. So here we have if, again, now we're pretending that we have 3 files over here that we're going to open. So previously we just printed our accessions of interest, which was all A, into a file called accessions of interest. Now we want to print A to a specific file, those starting with B to a specific file, and whatever's left over. So we've got an if statement that says if it starts with A, write it to this first file. If it starts with B, write it to the accession start with B file, and then whatever's left over, write that to the leftover accession. And please remember, if you've named this file the same this time around, it will overwrite the other file that you previously printed to. It will overwrite the information that's in there. So be careful that you don't overwrite files by giving it the same name as an existing file in that folder. Okay,